Abasebo ne banyabo tukomyewo webale kubanga mukyali naffe Council Secretary General, we can continue. We would like to ask you about elections of the party, the grassroots elections. How soon do you expect that to happen?
No, we are going to first deal with the question of the constitutional amendment. There are many things that we're looking at, setting up structures across the country, different levels and all that, but all that will be subject to the constitutional amendment. Once we have amended the constitution and agreed on which structures to have in the first place, because our constitution, for example, right now, talks of having committees from the village up to the regional level, up to the national level. So it will depend if through our constitutional amendment we decide to retain that arrangement, then we'll go on and fill that arrangement. But our projection was that if it was not for the COVID situation, by September, we should actually have started a robust establishment of structures from the grassroots. But now, because of the COVID situation, we don't know where it will go, we don't know how it will go. So that is one of the reasons why we may delay a bit, but I'm not so sure. Because as you know, mobilization, recruitment involves a lot of interactions with people at the grassroots level. So it will depend on this situation. But also we are alive to the fact that even other political parties which have been there before, before NUP came, have also not been allowed to build structures. You remember, you know, the runarounds with the police, which FDCs to engage in, because the regime only wants NRM to be the only one which has the ability to build structures. So we know that most likely they are going to use the excuse of COVID to try and block us from establishing our structures. But let's see what happens. Our commitment is to see that we establish structures across the entire country.
But it can also be logistical. It requires a lot of financing. How prepared are you to finance that?
That's what I said, that it depends on many factors, of course, including the financial. And we think that when that time comes, we'll see how to, work within the available resources to be able to build. Because this is, again, not work for the party or whatever. It is for the people of Uganda. And in many cases, we've seen people volunteer to do a lot of this work that has been happening in NUP. A lot of it has been volunteer. Ugandans have really, for me, I go to places with our president, for example, and every time he goes to a fuel station in the outskirts of Kampala, someone comes and says, you know what, I want to buy this fuel. When I sit somewhere to have lunch sometimes, someone comes and says, you know what, we appreciate the work you're doing. Let me pay. People are going to volunteer to support this work that goes on, to make sure that we have structures and we continue to strengthen ourselves to take the leadership of this country.
That must lead into the delegates conference. Is that so?
Yeah, but the delegates conference, as you know, like I said, is unless if we decide to have an extraordinary delegates conference, for example, to approve the constitutional amendments and that kind of thing. But ordinarily, we should have a delegates conference every 5 years to elect leaders at the national level. But even before we talk about the national level, we want to be able to fill positions down.
Yeah. When that time comes, do you intend to seek re-election, keep your position as Secretary General?
I really don't know. It's too early to tell. But like I said, a lot of this work is, we do a lot of volunteering in these positions. When I look at my colleagues, my classmates who I studied with at Harvard, who I studied with at Oxford, and see where they are, the things they're doing, many of them are extremely successful lawyers in the United States, or they are at the ICC, they are wherever. But for me, it was a decision I made out of conviction to be involved in this work, to see that we change our country.
You call it a sacrifice?
Of course it's a sacrifice, but it's not only my sacrifice. My sacrifice is no greater than the sacrifice of Ghetto Speaker, than the sacrifice of Eddie Mutwe, than the sacrifice of Nubian Lee. Some of the people have actually even had to sacrifice more. They paid with their lives. If you look at that wall, which is in our hall, we have people who died, who lost lives. They are no longer anywhere in this life because they made the ultimate price. Frank Senteza, Rita Nabukenya, Dan Cheyune, all these individuals
What must we do to make sure they don't die in vain?
Continue the struggle. Continue the struggle for change and democracy in this country. We remind ourselves each day that if we ever betray this cause, we will not have only betrayed ourselves, but we will have betrayed all those people who died. And that is what our leaders must always remember. People who rise to positions of leadership, whether members of parliament, councillors, and others, at the back of their minds before they make any decision, they must always remember that people have paid the ultimate price in this cause that we are involved in.
When time comes for elections at national level, will it be permissible for anybody to stand against the principle, for instance?
Like I said, we are going to amend our constitution. But of course, if we're talking about a democracy, then we're talking about democracy. And we are not like NRM where they have a sole candidate. If you remember, even someone to hold our flag here, we advertised, even in the newspapers, and said, whoever is interested, please come up and express interest. But, you know, maybe because the members thought it was very important for Honorable Chagulanyi to be unopposed, no one else expressed interest amongst our members. So, and within that time, of course, you remember the state tried to send here Andrew Mwenda and those other antics they tried to do. But at least no member of the party within the time which we set came up to oppose him. So when that time comes, we will see how that goes.
There is also an elephant in the room that I would like that we address a bit.
Yeah.
The current spike in coronavirus has, by some people, been blamed to NUP. That your decision to go campaigning without observing SOPs is the reason why we are here in the second wave. What do you have to say?
That is the most unfortunate and most laughable thing for anyone to say. First of all, everyone will remember that we, as NUP, opposed having elections in the middle of a pandemic. We wrote to the Speaker of Parliament, we spoke to the Electoral Commission and said, let's not have elections in the middle of a pandemic. We said, let the Constitution of Uganda be operational. The Constitution of Uganda provides that if there are reasons why there cannot be a normal election, the election should be postponed for 6 months. And the problem is that, or the challenge to General Museveni and his regime, was that if that provision was to be enforced, then the Speaker of Parliament would at some point have to take over and be the president, and which Museveni could not allow. Like someone has said in the past, Museveni has never imagined waking up and he's not the president of this country. But, so we did not want there to be an election in the midst of a pandemic. But when we started, who did the elections first? NRM did its primaries. And you remember how they were. People gathered in thousands and thousands. People gathered, there were rallies, there was whatever. People were shot dead. You remember the elections were by lining up. And actually the primaries of NRM were at a time when the COVID cases were at the highest during the first wave. When we went into the elections, they said all of a sudden that now there was a pandemic. Chikubo was open for business, the churches were open, whatever was open, but they were saying you cannot campaign. While they were saying you cannot campaign, NRM was doing campaign meetings. You remember when we went to Arua, went to Pakwach and all these other places, you remember? Museveni and his people actually used to send musicians ahead of them to mobilize people, you know, to gather and all that. I remember in Busia, General Museveni had to move out of the car and actually address a mammoth gathering of people. So what we were calling out were the double standards. We said what is good for the goose must be good for the gander. You cannot say that NUP will not have meetings while NRM is having its meetings. Secondly, we made it clear that you cannot have an election that's not a normal election. The COVID pandemic, the COVID was just being used as an excuse to clamp down, just like they were using the Public Order Management Act and all sorts of things in the past. Yeah.
Okay. So you don't accept any blame?
Definitely not. And like I said, first of all, and if you see whatever we are saying was that elections are, as of necessity, very emotive. Elections are emotive. You cannot be in an election, even if we had an election here. People will start campaigning, people will start jumping up and down, people will start will be excited. For example, Honorable Chagulanyi had been blocked by the time we went for elections. He had been blocked from performing for 2.5 years. Now, the people in the outskirts there had not seen this man for all this time. How do you expect him to go to Busia and people do not gather? How do you expect him to go to Pakwach and people do not gather? You know? So people had to come up to express their love and support for him, and that is why, in the first place, we had advised against having an election in the midst of a pandemic.
Thank you. Mr. Rubongoya, we are merely months away from IALA elections, when this country will be determining its representatives for the assembly in Arusha. Is it true that you are interested in being one of the NUP representatives in IALA?
I've never made a public declaration to run in IALA, and I have not yet. When that time comes, if I decide to, I will, but it's not anywhere close to my thoughts as of today. But what I can also add is that currently, the way IALA is structured is that it is literally NRM which determines who becomes the candidate. And it is very unfair. So that's one of the things we're challenging. We're saying this should not be the way it is done, because the NRM has previously used it as a tool to manipulate leaders of other political parties, to manipulate members of other political parties, you know. So if they are trying to compromise you, they can say, please come, and then we will give you IALA. But we're saying, no, that should, if you see the treaty talks about proportional representation almost, says that, the IALA will be constituted by the parties in accordance with the strength of these parties in parliament. Now, if for all these years, NRM normally says, for us, we're going to take 6 slots, and then we give the entire opposition 3 slots. And of course, you know how Museveni uses that. If he sees these 2 slots, which he normally wants to give out to the opposition, he looks at them as gifts to the opposition. So we are working with our leaders, different leaders, the Honorable Chief Whip and others, to see that these rules change. But if they remain the way they are, certainly they will always disadvantage the minority within Parliament, which minority is there by mistake, because, as you know, many of our MPs actually would have won. Many of our MPs were doing very, very well. Yesterday, I interacted with one of our candidates from Bali, and he showed me some of the evidence and how the regime blatantly just changed its results. Of course, in other places like Western Uganda and Northern Uganda, some of our candidates were just kidnapped and kept away until after elections. So when I talk about the strength of NRM in Parliament, it is not that they are there legitimately. It is simply because of the circumstances which they created at that time. Yeah.
There is this issue of iPod, where you now qualify as NUP to sit. My question is, have you already enrolled for membership of iPod?
No, you don't enroll for membership of iPod. iPod, you join it by making a memorandum of understanding. And after 5 years, the MOU expires, and then a new one is negotiated. So certainly iPod, the Secretariat has reached out to us, even previously, and we've made it clear that before we join iPod, we must agree on certain fundamentals, and the role of iPod needs to be revisited. Right now, as you know, there are many things they've not been able to achieve or to change, because ideally the role of iPod should be to deepen democracy and participation of political parties. Like I said, for example, if opposition parties are not allowed to build structures, if they are not allowed to open offices, if they are not allowed to recruit members, then what iPod are we talking about? So what we've said is that for us to have, because iPod in full is an inter-party organization for dialogue. Now, for that iPod to be meaningful, we must have a fair playing field. We must, members should be respected. Look, right now as I speak, hundreds of our people are missing. Kalanzi, this gentleman whose picture appears on the T-shirt I'm putting on, was picked up from his home in Waise. This is Kalanzi Ashraf. He was picked up because he was a mobilizer of the party. Was picked up from his home, beaten up very badly. His wife was beaten, the children were beaten. He was taken to some place and beaten like no man's business. He was kept incommunicado. Our lawyers tried to look for him, failed to access him until we saw him being presented before a military court and eventually taken to Chitaria. Now, IPOD had made a resolution, if you remember when Museveni and these parties came together after elections. Of course, he was trying to sanitize whatever he had done. And you know, they talked about releasing of these people, and he promised to look into it. But up to now, some of our people are missing. Yesterday, I was meeting here individuals who came from abroad, reached the airport, and they were immediately abducted and taken to Gulu. They were kept there for months and months. They only released about 3 days ago. So if you're talking about, so our view is that IPOD should be able to create a fair playing field. And when we are negotiating this, the new MOU, it's one of the conditions we're going to put in place, so that we want to be in an organization which respects, where all political players respect each other, they respect the rule of law, they respect good governance, and such other things.
So is there a possibility you could stay away in case your conditions are not met?
Definitely. It's not mandatory to join that institution. It is not.
And you wouldn't regret missing out on that platform to...
No, like I said, we are going to, and you see, it's not just about us. I'm sure that the FDC and other parties will also be raising similar concerns to see that, and you know, even previously, some of these other parties, opposition parties, have opted out and said, we are going to stay out from your meetings because of this and that. So why do we know that the secretariat of IPOD is also, you know, is not the problem, because it is also, its hands are tied. You know, the secretariat of IPOD is funded by the Netherlands Institute for Multi-Party Democracy. For them, they just come to support efforts of dialogue. But I don't think they've achieved the purpose for which they came here, because there cannot be dialogue where one person decides to put his foot on your neck and then say, let's talk. What are we talking about if you're doing that? But like I said, once we are negotiating the MOU, we're going to look at all these and raise our concerns, raise our issues, make certain demands.
As NUP, you currently have about 60 members of parliament in the House. What is the party benefiting from them? Is there any benefit at all?
This is, I don't want you to really look at me as a party bureaucrat. What we're involved in is a struggle for change. And every individual who takes on a role must and should use that position to further the struggle for freedom and democracy in Uganda. It is just not about occupying a position, it's about advancing this struggle. And I'm grateful to our MPs and leaders who have continued to advance the struggle in different ways. And we are encouraging all the other leaders to follow suit and make sure that we take the struggle forward. So it's not just about the benefit to the party, but what are we benefiting as a nation? And one of the things we're going to be seeing is, I'm sure we're going to be seeing our MPs deepen this idea of service delivery, because we want to show how different we can be and how we would do things better if we were in charge of this country.
Talking about the office of, even before that, sir, we recently had the process to determine the leadership of Uganda caucus, which actually created a lot of contradictions as expected, to the extent that some senior leaders walked out of some meetings. As a part of you made some initiatives to reach out and de-escalate the situation?
You're speaking as if there is a situation to de-escalate. And, you know, like, a lot of times you people in the media try to create a lot of wars even where they are not. I don't think there was a big contradiction as you're trying to present it. It was just a mere small misunderstanding. And that is expected every time there's an election.
Can potentially escalate into a huge contradiction
Yeah,
if
but
not well
it
managed.
has not escalated to that level because the leaders are talking. Yeah. And like I said, in NUP, we believe in sitting down together and resolving issues. So we've been doing that even before, all these issues came up. We had different leaders, senior leaders sitting together to try and bring harmony, and that's our approach, and that's what we continue to do.
Then we have a number of offices at Parliament, LOP, WHIP, committee chairpersons, etc. In your view, how long should people occupy these offices? Some people think it's ideal that you serve for 2.5 years so that the party can benefit from the diversity of talent and the things like that. What's your view?
No, I actually have no view about that as yet because, like I said, I don't want to come and give my personal views about something as serious as that. This is a matter that we are going to discuss as a party, but also together with the leaders who occupy those positions currently, and see what is the best way to deal with such issues. But most importantly, to look at also the performance of these leaders. If the leaders are performing well, and especially by performing well, for me, I'm talking about advancing the struggle. If the leaders are advancing the struggle, then why change them? But again, we might have different leaders come with different thoughts. This is my personal view. It's not a party position, definitely. But I believe it will depend mostly on that, the idea that the leaders should be part of the conversation to determine the tenure of leadership, etc.
Thank you, sir. As we move towards finishing this discussion, I would like to ask you a question about Dr. Kizza Besigye. A lot of things have been said about him. Some people say he's actually a project imposed by General Museveni to neutralize the opposition. Some people say he has even never qualified to be a medical doctor, and many other things, have been asserted against him. To the extent some people actually say that this is the first time this country is having a genuine opposition to General Museveni. Do you really agree with such things? What generally is your opinion about the same?
I think anyone who seeks to diminish the role of Dr. Kizza Besigye in the struggle for freedom and democracy in Uganda is really disingenuous. And our position, including our president's position, as you've seen, has been very clear. We've been trying to reach out to him for guidance, for thoughts. Dr. Kizza Besigye has certainly made incredible sacrifices at a personal level. For example, his blood brother died in Luzira from prison. I mean, he was taken to Mulago, but really his ailment started from prison. He has lost personal friends, relations, and that kind of thing. You remember what happened to him, how he was battered, brutalized several times. So I cannot diminish his contribution. He certainly played and continues to play a very big role. And our view is that we should come together, bring our forces together to take things forward. But when you're dealing with a disenfranchised population and a desperate population, a people who have waited for decades and decades for change, sometimes they start asking those questions. And like you rightly put it, even us, sometimes some people have come up and branded us moles, said, all sorts of things will be said. Some of these things are sponsored by the regime to try and demoralize you. You can imagine how Dr. Kizza Besigye would feel if he was not the solid leader that he is, when you have sacrificed your entire life and people start calling you a project. And that has happened not only to him, but to other people as well. I remember General Muntu and others. But what we are saying is that as a generation, we also have a role to play. When Dr. Kizza Besigye joined the Bush War, I think he was in his mid-20s.
Than you are now.
Yeah, he was younger than I am now. When General Mugisha Muntu was the army commander of this country, he was younger than I am.
29.
He was 29. When the Kaindo Tafiles and others were part of the Bush War struggle, they were very young people. And so that's why we're saying that, look, we also have a role to play in changing this country, but most importantly, making sure that we do not betray the people we do not do what the NRM did, because the NRM came and before long, people were writing books betrayed by my leader. We want to be different from these people, but we believe that we have a role to play. Me as an individual, and I always tell the intellectuals of this country, one of the quotations I love, or one of the quotations that inspires me, is from none other than that man called Museveni, because when at the burial of Meles Zenawi, he made a statement that really intrigued my mind. And he said that in the 1960s and in the 1970s, when we were growing up, intellectuals had two choices. You could either live a normal life, marry, have children, drive a good car, and live a normal life, which was ruled by brutal dictatorships. The alternative was fighting for the people. And he concluded by saying that our generation, he was talking about himself, the Meles Zenawis and others, who chose to struggle and in the process lost many of our comrades and went through many problems, have created new conditions for the people of Africa. The young people of Uganda and the young people of Africa are back to that point. They have two choices.
That was him saying.
That was him saying, except that now he has forgotten all that. But that was him speaking. And
A powerful statement.
yeah, for me, I think the intellectuals of today, the young people of today, have the same challenge. You have two choices. You can decide to live a normal life, see torture victims on TV and just pretend as if you've not seen them. Unfortunately, tomorrow they will come for you. I was reading on Twitter a young man who was recently taken in a drone because soldiers thought he was the one who announced Museveni dead. They took him, beat him up, did all sorts of things to him in a case of mistaken identity. So the other day I was also seeing a journalist, I think working with NTV, who was also picked up by a drone for simply taking pictures. If we allow lawlessness to continue, in our society, everyone ultimately will be a victim. So the young people, everyone has an option to rise up, to stand up, and defend democracy and the rule of law.
Okay. As we end this, is it allowed to ask you some personal questions, one or two of them?
No.
Kindly, let me ask them, sir.
It's not.
For instance, why are you not married? When do you intend to get married?
Yeah, well, you know, the play, one of the plays I read in O-level literature was I Will Marry When I Want. You remember that?
Ngugi wa Thiong'o.
Yeah, Ngugi wa Thiong'o. But, well, I'm actually very committed, and I will not give details beyond that. And if there is any other step that I will take, I will let you know at the time. But like you said, these are matters I wouldn't really want to dwell on so much.
I know you've always been a very private person. Do you ever have any free time at all?
It's difficult to get what you call free time, because even the time I have to myself, I would rather use it reading a book or speaking to young people about why we need to change this country and that kind of thing. The struggle we're involved in is a very serious struggle, and eventually it takes you up. You find that you really, really don't have time for many other things except concentrating on this.
Then very finally, sir, where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years or more?
No, well, I cannot tell. What I can say is that my approach is to live one day at a time. But my question is, every day, you know, someone said that if you're able to account for every second, then you'll be able to account for every minute, then you'll be able to account for every hour, then you're able to account for every day, for every week, for every month, for every year. Once I make sure that I am doing the right thing with my time, with my life, at every one point, then I try to, I know then that whatever happens in the years to come, it will be worth it. And, you know, like I said, it's not that all the time, you know, sometimes we try to create time to relax a bit and that kind of thing, but even in that sense, you'll go to Savara, for example, to have, you know, a calm time. But before long, you'll be dragged in a conversation of how to change this country. Or someone will come and show you a new song that they have released about the struggle and that kind of thing. So when Mandela stood in the Rubongoya trial and he said, "The struggle is my life," this is what it means. The struggle becomes your life and it takes you over. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. We don't take your time for granted. We look forward to interacting with you some other day.
Thank you very much.
Thank
sir,
you very much.
for your time. And God bless.
Yankula w'ennyumba olongera nafuna evidence. Mulanya kuwamanyira ebuuza omusada nikukinga naye ebidogo okukuba emiziki era n'emuta n'ekola ebirala omanyi emirimu gy'ekibuga teka wano n'otegeewalala zinakwagakolesekere atali wandawusanzalawa abaali batwita badogo luli tubayitako tunyola nkata abakadde naawe yakala omulimu gwokola eyo ye ofisi ye obakola amanyankyokola ekyo yedde omulimu kasita okulongoosa n'okuyonjayonja obakola amanyankyokola ekyo yedde okuyona wewozingira ensi nakyalako ewakirumira lumo ewubere yankula w'ennyumba olongere nafuna evidensi y'abantu balina ensimbi tenalina amalala era manyi nabala nayate ye nalaba eyamala okuloba nze ebuli wasoma meka ye sasoma kugenda wala nze omukaka wamusulawa ye mumirimu gyemsalaba genda obunze kuba nsingako abaganda b'omukibuga Kampala abamu basooka mu butembeyi abalala batunda kabalagala buli njogwe bayakali kasito gitwala ng'eyakali ate n'omwavu ali omu omuntu asala w'emirimu wano wange sibuka kooda abeewonanereyazika kale bononira ekolera watwalengayo kyalika omumanye kyakalima kole mamera ekasawo akola amanyankyokola ekyo yedde omulimu mube kasita okulongoosa n'okuyonjayonja obakola amanyankyokola ekyo yedde omulimu mube kyokuyona wewozingira ensi abajeresirika abajereke abogesirika abajegere. Remember when the cock cross, we don't mean it's sick, we mean it's time to wake up. See? Mulanya okuwamanyira ebuuza omusada nikukinga naye ebidogo okukuba emiziki era n'emuta n'ekola ebirala omanyi emirimu gy'ekibuga teka wano n'otegeewalala zinakwagakolesekere atali wandawusanzalawa abaali batwita badogo luli tubayitako tunyola nkata abakadde naawe yakala omulimu gwokola eyo ye ofisi ye